Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. This time around, we've got a special sneak peek into another excellent cocktail-related podcast that you should definitely be listening to. We are not the only fish in the sea. Last week, in episode 82, we spoke with Pedro Shanahan, host of the Spirit Guide Society podcast. If you haven't had a chance to check out that interview, I definitely recommend you go back and give it a listen, but it's not a prerequisite, just a damn good conversation that you should not miss. So go and check it out. This episode, we're cross-pollinating the airwaves with one of my personal favorite episodes of the Spirit Guide Society podcast so that you can soak in a ton of information about Highland Scotch from Tomatin brand ambassador Scott Fraser. But first, you know what? This wouldn't be the Modern Bar Cart podcast if I didn't give you a chance to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Rob Roy, which is very simply a Scotch Manhattan. To make a Rob Roy cocktail, you'll need 2 ounces of blended Scotch whiskey, 1 ounce of sweet vermouth, and several dashes of orange bitters. As always, we like to use our embitterment orange bitters whenever possible. Just like a normal Manhattan, you combine all the ingredients in a mixing glass with ice, stir for 15 to 20 seconds until everything is perfectly chilled and diluted, and then strain into a stemmed cocktail glass and garnish with an orange twist or a brandied cherry, depending on where your sweetness preferences fall. Now, notice that I mentioned blended Scotch in the ingredients list. This is a particular classification of Scotch that tends to be affordable and great for mixing. It's pretty much agreed that the best-in-class blended Scotches on the market, at least here in the US, are Monkey Shoulder and the Dimple Pinch. And those bottles usually fall between $40 and $50. Most other bottles of blended Scotch fall well below that price point, which is why it's a popular mixing ingredient for cocktails. I wanted to bring the whole blended Scotch distinction to your attention because in the following interview, the focus is going to be single malt Scotch. And not just single malt, but Highland single malt. So you can see that we're starting to layer a lot of distinctions on here. Now, we're going to find some time, of course, to sit down with a few Scotch experts and really give you a full understanding of both the mash bill and geographic classifications that apply to Scotch whiskey. But for the purposes of this episode, you really only need to know a couple things. First, single malt Scotches are generally thought to be a bit more premium than blended Scotches because of the way the malt is sourced. And second, whiskeys from different parts of Scotland, for example, the Highlands, tend to display different flavor profiles based on the production and aging practices of that region, in addition to the unique terroir that the land, the people, and the atmosphere lends to the process. Now, depending on who you talk to, it's an aberration to use a nice single malt Scotch in a Rob Roy. You should sip that with a few drops of water, they say. But personally, I think if you've got a nice bottle of Scotch, and a nice bottle of vermouth, and a nice fresh garnish, and some good bitters, you're kind of almost obligated to see how they work together. Getting back to our crossover episode with the Spirit Guide Society podcast, the bottles that Tomatin brand rep Scott Fraser will taste us through are as follows. Tomatin Dualcus, Tomatin 12-year, Tomatin 14-year, Tomatin 15 Muscatel, Tomatin 18, Kubokan, and Tomatin 36. The numbers in those bottle names refer to how long they were aged for and in some cases the types of casks that they were finished in. Everything else you'll learn along the way. So pour yourself a nice dram of something brown and peaty. Imagine the sound of a wee bagpipe drifting majestically across a windswept loch. And, of course, enjoy this spirited Scotch tasting brought to you courtesy of the Spirit Guide Society podcast and Tomatin brand rep, Scott Fraser.
Please give a nice welcome to Mr. Scott Fraser from Tomatin.
Tomatin! Come on!
Tomatin. Okay, so
Tomatin.
Just let's welcome him and then we'll work this out.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun with our single malt whiskey tonight. The most important thing is to relax and enjoy yourselves, but from the looks of things, I think we already have that sort of environment. So just a quick sort of introduction. How many of you have actually tasted Tomatin single malt whiskey before? Excellent.
4, 5, 6 people?
6 people. So the rest of you, you're all in for the best night of your lives. The best whiskey night of your lives, maybe not the best night of your lives.
These are like the best kind of whiskey societies for me. It's like when we're all discovering something new. Because, I drink a ton of whiskey, but I don't really know that much about. I can't even say the name.
I don't just say no. The wonderful thing about language.
When I say it sounds more like Lord of the Rings. It's nicer. It's Tomatin. It's like putting my spear in the
Pedro,
ground.
you tell everyone exactly how you want to tell it. I'm not going to get upset.
No. You're supposed to tell me. I'm learning. I'm trying to learn. I'm just slow learner.
It's just like tomat. No, I'm saying.
Oh! What? What
But you
just
try to slow it
happened?
down, but it runs naturally for us. Because
Okay,
it's a place in Scotland.
I'll work on it.
But there are people in Scotland that will call it Tomatin because of the way that they speak the English language. So we don't get upset about how people say it, It's all come down from a slightly bastardized version of Gaelic, so it all comes down into one sort of language.
What does it mean?
So, funnily enough, the name Tomatin means hill. So Tom means hill, and Atin means juniper. So you'd actually think that we'd be making gin at Tomatin Distillery. But funnily enough, there's actually a link with juniper to distilling, and especially the art of ancient distillation. So in Scotland for hundreds upon hundreds of years, whiskey was made illegally, as I'm sure you've all been told before, in the hills and the glens. But as distilling sort of took a hold, they had to become more and more secretive. And what they used to have to do is try and hide the smoke underneath from the excise man. Now, when you burn juniper bushes, now juniper was a bush that was found quite common across the whole of Scotland. When you burn this bush when it's dried out, it gives off no smoke.
What?
So all the illicit distillers used to burn all this juniper underneath the stills. So if you ever come to Tomatin, what you'll find is that on the hill of the juniper, there's no juniper. So
they used it all up.
We used it all up, and very efficiently as well, may I add. So
That's a cool story.
yeah, so there is actually a link between juniper and single malt distillation as well. But obviously the whiskey that was being made in these illicit stills back then isn't quite what we're making now.
Right. But you guys have been around for a while. So when did the company start? How did
So we were obviously illegal whiskey was made in the area for a long time. There's a house on the site where they used to, in the times of the Jacobites and the last Scottish Civil War, they were sort of trading whiskey at this illicit outpost. But the distillery was built in 1897. 1897 was the decade in Scotland when the most amount of whiskey was built up until this decade. So it's called the Victorian Boom. So many distilleries were actually built in the 1890s, and the reason who we have to thank for that is the French and the Spanish, because a disease started attacking their grapes, which put the price of wine and brandy sky high. And in doing that, what happened is that Scottish businessmen saw an opportunity to make a quick pound or two, which Scottish people are they quite enjoy doing from time to time. So they've got a little bit of a reputation as being slightly penny pinching, especially from our part of the world. But so they built lots of distilleries, and Tomatin was one of these. Tomatin was a perfect location for building a distillery because we were quite close to some good agricultural ground for growing barley.
Right.
We have an excellent water source.
You guys are south of Inverness?
10 miles south of Inverness. So
And that's the northeast part of
Northeast.
Scotland where
It's the narrowest.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
So it's the narrowest part of Scotland. So it's only 40 miles from the east coast to the west coast.
Yeah. It's the skinniest part of Scotland.
Yeah, which is why they've got me here.
He had In and Out for the first time today.
A Californian staple, you know. It was a good time, so no, I thoroughly enjoyed it.
So tell us, you guys, but there was a whole like boom thing. Like, so you were born in the boom.
We were born in the boom, and we were born from a group of local Inverness businessmen. Unfortunately, they weren't the best businessmen in the world, and after the sort of Patterson crash and everything, we went out of business in 1906. The distillery really started to transform in 1908 when we were bought over by a couple of English wine merchants. They started up a company called Tomatin Distillers, and obviously during World War I and World War II, not much whiskey was produced. But between the end of World War I and the 1970s, Tomatin went under a rapid period of expansion. So we went from having 2 copper pot stills and producing about 100,000 litres of spirit to, in the middle of the 1970s, we had 23 copper pot stills and we're producing 12.5 million litres of spirit. To put that into context, in the 70s, we were as big as Glenfiddich and Glenlivet almost are today. But what we've done is we've managed to sort of change our philosophy. So in the 80s, when the market crashed, we went back to becoming a lot smaller operation. So we went from having 23 stills to having 12 stills, of which we only use 10. So we make 2 million litres of spirit now. What we focus on is quality and consistency, and also focusing on the different casks that we use for maturation.
So in the past, these guys were making whiskey for blends almost entirely. And so in that way, you were so big that maybe you don't have to care about the character of the whiskey as much as just producing alcohol. Yeah, if you're blending house, you know.
Exactly. So not exactly. So the quality of some of the whiskey that was made in the 1970s is fantastic. If any of you come to the distillery and come and visit us and come and see me on a very good day, then I can take you and show you some whiskey from the 70s that is absolutely breathtaking. So there's nothing wrong with what the people were doing back now. It
was all pot still whiskey. I just get jaded sometimes because we have so many. I just tap my mic. It's super awesome for sound. The column still distillates, though, they can be so astringent that they don't have any character at all. And like a lot of the whiskey that's out there is kind of blends of these, like
exactly
astringent quality, and there's something that gives the flavor to that isopropyl base. But it's way more interesting to like experience things that come out of these pot stills.
There's good and bad qualities in all whiskies, and bad's probably the wrong word to use if I'm a good salesman, but obviously I'm not. But what we have to have is this sort of consistency in the product that we're putting out, because now over 50% of what we produce goes into the glass as Tomatin single malt whiskey. So it's an incredibly important part of our DNA and of our makeup, and that it's not just us that is responsible for. We have a community at the distillery. So even to this day, we still have 80% of our workforce still live and work at the distillery.
Which is, if you go to Scotland, you'll see a lot of towns are like that. Like a lot of towns were built around distilleries. Like the church likes to make their claims, but let me tell you, everybody drinks.
Yeah, put it this way. Oh yeah, have you got a question?
Yeah, I was wondering why the market crashed in the 80s.
So there was a global recession.
Okay.
There was a global recession, and I mean, it depends which spin that you listen to on things. There was overproduction in Scotland in the 1980s. There was perhaps too much whiskey that was being made with no market for it. Whereas then after that, I think people have been a lot more reserved. And so what that's done is it's able to create a lot of these new distilleries that are opening, which is fantastic for everybody because it gives everybody more variety and more choice. But the market crash, there was a global recession in the middle of the 1980s, and so many of the famous distilleries closed down. Luckily, our distillery managed to sort of hold on, retain a lot of the workforce, and so we have a lot of these characters that we're still working at the distillery now that experienced that crash, which is quite nice.
Who were you selling your whiskey to for? What blends are you kind of famous for?
So in terms of the blends, so it wasn't just our blends that we were going into, which we have some of our own. So we have Big T, which was famous in the local area, which meant Big Tomatin. You know, even to this day, there's still some of the boys that work at the distillery that will drink Big T over a single malt.
Big T, that sounds right.
Put it this way, you wouldn't have been up to 2:15 last night drinking it, Pedro.
As we do. It was Mezcal Collective. We just kept going.
That's it. That's what it's all about. But one of our other blends is Antiquary, which is a more deluxe blend. But I'm not looking at anyone in particular in the room when I say this, but if you were drinking any of the famous Diageo or Pernod Ricard blends, like as the companies were back then, like Johnny Walker, Chivas Regal, you probably had a little bit of Tomatin. Tomatin, as you'll taste, the base malt behind it is an excellent spirit for blending.
So it's a Highland style from the northeastern part of Scotland, but you really, I mean, it's sweeter than most Highlands. It's more fruity than most Highlands.
So it's got more of that character that's sort of, that's why we give ourselves the tagline as being the softer side of the Highlands. So we're right on the borderline between being a Highland and a Speyside. When you come to the distillery, when you look south, you see the Cairngorm Mountains, and on the other side of the mountains is the River Spey. Our water source flows into the River Findhorn, which goes out 10 miles west, 10 miles west of Elgin in a town called Forres, and the River Spey goes out 10 miles east in the River Fochabers. So the starting point's at an incredibly similar point in Scotland, but we are quite a unique little distillery in our own little way that we try not to stick to too many rules and regulations, which is fun.
You could do that up there, right?
Yeah.
You can get away with that. So the first expression that we're having tonight
is Tomatin Dualcus.
Say that again.
Dualcus.
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 Tomatin Dualcus. Can you say that?
Dualcus.
The whole thing, though. You have to say that.
Tomatin Dualcus.
She's good.
Yeah. Can you come up and say it for me? Because sometimes I struggle. So this in Gaelic, the Scottish language, Dualcus means cultural heritage. So cultural heritage is all about the imprint and the legacy that the distillery has left on the community. You alluded earlier on to towns springing up around a distillery. So Tomatin is the prime example of this happening. When the distillery was built in the 1890s, it was built in an old shooting and fishing estate called Tomatin. There was no village around there. Now if you come there's a village of about 1,500, 2,000 people.
Wow.
So very much a community distillery. And this whiskey, the recipe for this whiskey was actually selected by everybody that works at the distillery. So
they voted on it?
It was the year before I started. Actually, when I came up for my interview at Tomatin, I came up and did a wee tour around the distillery, and this was the new release at the time. So this is when I found out about this. So what our distillery manager at the time, he started about 7 years ago. He's a chap called Graham Unson. He selected several different recipes, and instead of one or two of them just selecting two of members of our staff selecting what whiskey came out, we thought, let's put this to the popular vote. So every single member of staff got to vote on which whiskey recipe they wanted to come into to become Tomatin Dualcus, and this is the result of it here. This is a no-age statement whiskey. The youngest whiskey going in here will be 4 years old, which is in virgin American oak casks. And then the oldest whiskies going in here will be 8 years old, which are
those charred barrels?
They're charred. Yeah, it's about a medium char. It's not a very strong char, but it's not a light char.
Well, it hasn't been used to age bourbon in?
Never been used to age bourbon. Funnily enough, we buy the oak from the United States. Send the oak to Spain, to a cooperage. And then from Spain, it comes up to Scotland with the cask. So there's a little bit of a journey.
Renting sherry.
Yeah. So it's completely unaged beforehand, but what the virgin American oak gives you so much colour and flavour coming out of the cask incredibly quickly.
How long does it sit in there?
So the virgin oak is probably going to be about 4 years old, and then we also use first fill ex bourbon casks, which will probably be somewhere between 6 and 8 years old. Okay. What this does is it gives a lot of colour and a lot of flavour into a younger whiskey. The backbone running through here is our spirit, our distillery character, which hopefully we'll get into in a second, and how we achieve that. So that if you take one thing away from my tasting tonight is that Tomatin's spirit, the backbone, is soft, fruity, and malty, and so that backbone is there in the whiskey. And then we use various different casks to give it a different flavour. So have a little nose, have a little taste. In Scotland, people often tell you how whiskey should and shouldn't be drunk. The most important thing is to enjoy yourself when you're drinking it.
That's right.
There's many ways you can look at it. I mean, you can hold the whiskey up to the light, see what's happening. That just shows you how clean your glass is.
Good to check.
It's good to check. No, the whiskey's about enjoyment. So however you guys would like to enjoy the whiskey, please enjoy it. There's some water on the table.
Yeah.
Water opens up aromas.
Wow, it's got a nice grip.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I'm getting like, it's nutty and grassy. What are you guys getting? I mean, as you stick your nose in that glass, breathe in gently through your mouth, what are you reminded of? Spicy? What kind of spice? Cinnamon or chili? Cinnamon. Spiced wine. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So how big are the stills? You guys have 12 stills running right now. How big are those pots?
12 stills. Actually, there's 12 stills there, but 10 of them run.
Okay.
They're very big. They're very big pot stills. The exact measurement from top to bottom, I couldn't tell you. But the most important thing is we're able to create lots of reflux in the stills.
So is it a long line arm?
Long line arm, but importantly, we've got a reflux chamber at the top. So this reflux chamber scrambles the vapors and slows it down, which allows us to create this really soft character of spirit.
And because you guys were born in the boom of whiskey, you built big stills. Like before that, like people didn't know how things were going to go. But by that time, people were like, "Oh, this business is on. Let's build big stills and really go for it."
Exactly. But another peculiar thing is that Tomatin's wash stills are exactly the same size as our spirit stills. There's a lot of little sort of unique touches throughout the whole distillery, which is really, really nice.
Super cool. This is really nice. What's the bottle price if I was going to get a bottle for the home bar?
So anywhere from $24.99 on sale to $29.99.
That's cheap. No age statement. So this is younger Scotch. Maybe folks aren't, conscious of. There's a lot of non-age statement spirits out there, obviously, but sometimes you don't know how old the Scotch is you're drinking. And 4 years is like, this is damn good for 4-year-old Scotch. I would think that that would taste young. This does not taste young to me.
No, I think, honestly, you see if you ever come up to the distillery and you taste our spirit, our new mix spirit, which we can't call whiskey, it's actually a really quite nice drink in itself. There's so much character in there already. It's very, it's what the people that used to not behave when they worked in distilleries used to drink.
Right?
So the thing with Dualcus is that it's an incredibly diverse single malt whiskey. It does mix well. Those Virgin American oak casks work in prohibition cocktails, sours, anything. So
Stephanie and I just passed around the second mark. What is this?
So the second whiskey that we're passing around is Tomatin 12-year-old. Tomatin 12-year-old is the whiskey that we sell the most of around the world. I would argue that it's perhaps our most traditional style single malt whiskey.
Traditional in what sense? Highland, Speyside? Like what is it?
In terms of traditional, it's incredibly well balanced. This we recently changed our packaging to look like it does here, to make it more sort of softer, gentle, to reflect the source of the whiskey, to reflect the Highlands. But in terms of a traditional whiskey, we're trying to get that balance between vanilla and dried fruit, so bourbon and sherry casks. So the two most common casks that are used in a distillery's standard mark would be bourbon and sherry casks, and we're trying to get that as traditional as we possibly can.
Ooh, wow. Stick your nose in that glass, guys. What are you getting? So this is probably twice as old as the whiskey we just had.
Yeah, technically it's three times as old, really.
Oh, wow.
Because if we had to put an age on the Dualcus, it would be 4. But on Tomatin 12-year-old, everything is 12 years matured.
That's amazing. So, do you guys what kind of seasons do you have in that region of Scotland? Do you guys have really cold winters, really hot summers, or is it what kind of angel shares? What I'm getting at, how much evaporation happens from those barrels year to year?
It's so low, between 1 and 2%, probably closer to 1%.
Wow.
Tomatin itself is high up in the mountains. We're about 1,000 feet above sea level. The temperature is sort of controlled by the warehouse. So because we've got big thick walls and earthen floors, it allows us to mature for an awful lot longer period of time. Scotland itself has got quite a humid climate, so the humidity is really important. So the humidity stops the water from evaporating as quickly. So that means our alcohol content goes down, whereas in Kentucky and the Caribbean it goes up.
Always goes up, yeah.
So yeah, it's really, it allows us to create, we can get into whiskey that's sort of 50 years old as well, which is another part of
That's
what we do.
crazy. That's crazy.
So
what are you guys getting? As you stick your nose in that glass, tap some over your tongue, and share your experience. There's no wrong answers.
no wrong answers.
Chocolate and orange. That sounds like good whiskey to me.
A little bit, still like it's in the fermentation process, that
Banana-y,
that
apple-y,
banana- yeah, absolutely.
fresh.
I'm getting a little maple. I'm getting like kind of a maple and citrus. What are you guys getting?
Fermented fruit for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Gorgeous.
Citrus?
Orangey peel type, orange rind.
Ooh, I like that. I like the sound of that. Right on. So, 12-year.
Equal parts bourbon, sherry, and refill.
Oh, wow.
So it's a third in first and second fill bourbon, a third in first and second fill sherry, and a third in refill casks.
That's really cool, man. And what would this be like in the liquor store?
So $26.99 to $32.99.
What? 12-year-old whiskey for under $30?
Well, you got some crazy guys here that work on pretty low margins around here, so.
Wow.
Put it this way, you could almost find a bottle of Tomatin in this country a little bit cheaper than we can buy it at home.
Wow, that's mind-blowing. But if you don't have it in your local liquor store, just ask. A lot of times those mom and pop liquor stores, they'll get whatever you ask them to get. They've got nothing to lose. If they don't sell it to you, they'll sell it to somebody else. It's just a bottle. So, they buy the case, yeah, go check it out. This is great. This is totally great.
Phenomenal.
I love finding new little treasures. This 12 year is awesome.
The 12 year is beautiful, and to get the balance. So, we did change the recipe recently, so we went from finishing in sherry casks to a full maturation in sherry casks for a third. Just creates those beautiful link between bourbon and dried fruit.
What do you guys think about the mouthfeel? So, we talk a lot about smells and flavors, but what is the structure in your mouth? How does this feel? Is it light on the front, heavy in back? Think about the architecture of the whiskey, not just the flavors that come to mind. How does it feel once it's passed across your tongue? Change? What's your experience?
Very buttery.
Buttery, hell yeah.
Buttery, creamy, that sort of
It's got a big
all
mouthfeel.
dairy goodness.
Really, really cool. Really cool. So, what's this next mark that Stephanie's coming around?
14.
Tomatin 14. So in terms of our portfolio, the reason why we have diversity within it is to try and highlight different cask maturation and how we can play about with things. It's not, Tomatin doesn't have to have one set way. We don't have one set direction. We've got a portfolio in here. Within these 5 whiskies that we're tasting, there's virgin oak, sherry balanced, port casks, muscatel.
So you're really hitting all
Oloroso.
the marks. For people's different kinds of palates, you're hitting a lot of very interesting variances within the flavor profiles.
Exactly. But all that time retaining that Tomatin structure, which is so important to our whiskey.
Right on. So the 14, guys, what happens when you stick your nose in that glass? What are you reminded of?
Apple cider.
Apple cider, yeah, I get that.
So even if you hold this whiskey up to the light, you'll see that there's a nice little sort of rosé hue coming through it. So that might point you to the direction as to where these casks have come from.
Sherry cask, yeah?
No.
No.
Tawny port casks.
Oh, tiny
yeah, a
pour.
little left field. Wasn't expecting that.
So for folks who don't know, what does that bring?
So in terms of tawny port's a fantastic drink in itself. Tawny port, much like Oloroso sherry, is allowed to oxidize inside the cask. So as the port matures, you get this beautiful evolution between the port and the oak. So then when we get these port casks over from Oporto, we're able to put our whiskey in, and it's able to take these lovely combinations of port and oak. And the port's not too forward, the oak's not too forward, it's
Right.
subtle, it's not
Really
too
interesting.
intense.
So to understand, that most of the time when you're drinking out of a wine cask, that's just wine. But port is a fortified wine, meaning that they put distillate in the barrel with the wine to bring that alcohol level up. But it's very specific, like sherries and ports are very different than your typical table wine or whatever.
Oh, totally different drinks. I mean, the grapes themselves have got so much character that go towards making tawny port. So the with bourbon casks, it doesn't really matter what bourbon's been in there beforehand because the bourbon's extracting from the oak. But when it comes to the wine and the port, it's very important that the port and the wine have the right sort of body and structure because they're going to leave their imprint on the cask. So if we're going to put that into our whiskey, we need to make sure it's very good. We work with a winery called the Symington Winery in Oporto, so we select all of our tawny port casks from the Symington Winery.
Wow, that's super cool. What are you guys getting? I get raisins.
Yeah.
Raisins and almonds. What are you guys getting? Strawberry.
Those sort of red fruits.
Definitely.
Maybe it's the same thing, but I get that Maderized wine property like a Madeira.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Very, very similar drinks. Because there's a bit of sweetness, there's a bit of body.
Yeah, and then now tap it over your tongue and see how that experience changes. Sometimes your nose will lead you in one direction, but when you actually, especially in single malt scotches, you can like go down one road and then immediately switch to something completely
It
different.
smells like that baked brie that they put the compote in too. You know?
Now we're talking. I'm gonna buy you dinner.
Are you using proprietor's yeast or the wild yeast from Scotland or?
So yeah, it all comes from proprietary. So we actually just recently changed our yeast strain. So we were using a Maori distiller's yeast, and now we've moved something called MG Plus, which is hopefully in the future going to give our spirit a little bit more of that sort of fruity character.
Okay.
It just sort of because the gravity point's a little bit higher, so we can ferment to a little bit of a higher temperature. So we've changed a little bit of the production over the last 2 years, but all it's going to do is enhance the fruitiness as opposed to take anything away from the whiskey.
Have you been able to sample things and see that that's a clear difference between them?
Yes.
It could be a problem for the blenders at some point? Or?
So in terms of the blenders, we're not so worried about anymore because it's now about focusing on ourselves. So yeah, it's about now moving towards focusing on our own single malt. So that's what we're looking for in the future.
Well, I really like this 14. That's pretty awesome. And that bottle price is
$69.99 and probably $74, $75.
a little more fancy.
A little bit more fancy, but not.
A little bit higher proof.
Yeah. So everything so the first two whiskies that we tasted are 43%, and then everything else we're going to taste is 46%. When it comes to tasting this as well, you'll notice there's a lot more. For me, there feels like there's more body in this whiskey. Yeah, so if you look at it, you can see there's a little bit of these fats and esters left over as well. It's a lot more dense.
So this one is, what are we passing around right now?
This is a limited edition whiskey. It's Tomatin 15-year-old Moscatel.
Moscatel. So Moscatel grapes, for folks who don't know, what's the flavor character of a Moscatel grape?
So in terms of Moscatel grapes, what we're going to get is a lot of freshness in here. Some beautiful freshness. It almost tastes like is green, grassy, and sweet. It's more like a traditional dessert wine than anything else. So this Moscatel grapes are, again, this is a fortified wine also. But it's not. I think it's a late harvest white grape as opposed to being a late harvest red grape like would be used to make a tawny port. This has spent 9 years in bourbon casks and 6 years in the Moscatel. Again, the Moscatel casks come from Quinta de Bacalhau, which is a wine producer in Portugal. So this is a really beautiful, sweet whiskey.
That's so cool. This is really different. Like you can right on the front of the nose. It's like these deep purple fruit for me. Like it's
beautiful, beautiful, big, strong, and it works really well in desserts as well. So we recently we did a whiskey pairing dinner at a local restaurant in Inverness, and our friend at Cafe One in Inverness, Norman, his chef made a beautiful Cranachan, which is a traditional Scottish creamy pudding, and they put some Moscatel into it. Ooh. And we had some Tomatin Moscatel 15-year-old alongside it, and it was beautiful.
Damn. So what are you guys getting off of this? Smokiness. Is there any peat on this?
There's no peat, but it's not to say that you wouldn't get a little bit of smokiness coming through from the cask, but it's...
Well, no, also though, like
doesn't make it wrong.
Yeast can create phenolics as well. Yeah. So you don't always just get phenolics from smoking the grain or from charring the wood. It is possible for yeasts, in their expansive ability to create different flavors, there are certain esters that are smoky.
Out of interest, have any of you ever had whiskey that's been finished in Moscatel casks before?
I know.
No. So.
Yes, sir.
Just backtracking a bit. Was there any peat in the 14?
No peat in the 14. So everything that's Tomatin is completely unpeated.
Okay.
We do have a last minute addition, which is
They're far from Isla. These guys are like the other end of the country. They're doing something it's Highland, but you guys are a little bit in the space side. By having these different wine cask finishes, that's like a space side kind of vibe. They've been doing that for a while, you know?
So it's different. And I mean, this is a very much a limited edition whiskey. I think this is one of 4,000 bottles. So once this is gone, this will be gone. But what's nice thing about Tomatin is that we're always releasing something new and innovative that's coming out, which creates a good portfolio.
Yeah, it's not cloyingly tannic at all, but it does have a drying effect on your palate. It's beautiful. It's really nice.
Something completely different, and people have often come up to me and asked, Scott, do you have a sweet whiskey? And I've always probably tried to bullshit them a little bit and go, oh yeah, we do, but we don't really. But this is now a sweet whiskey, and I've never really noticed sweetness.
I'm gonna get a bottle of that right there. Steps coming around with the 18, and so let's back up a little bit. We had port casks, tawny port, and then we went to the Moscatel. What is going on over here?
So this is our biggest foray into sherry finishes. So this has been finished for between 3 and 4 years.
You guys are all saying that at the same time? You can smell the sherry right away? So go on, I'm sorry.
Much more intense sherry finish than anything else that we have. So the 12-year-old is matured in Oloroso sherry casks, but it's nowhere near as intense as the 18-year-old.
So for some people, like the sherry bomb thing is legit. I mean, it was like 4 years ago. Evan, when was it that the Yamazaki sherry cask won best whiskey in the world?
2013.
It's like 5 years ago or something? 2015. So that's when that's like the golden age of sherry bombs. Like all these whiskeys are coming out that are like super heavily sherried. So there's a lot of variance. Well, how do you feel about the heavily sherried scotches?
So in terms of the structure of scotches, some scotches the spirit will hold up a lot more for a longer maturation in sherry. With Tomatin, what we're very careful of is to retain the integrity of the spirit. The spirit is the sort of backbone, so we always want to be able to taste this. With this whiskey, you can certainly get that in the initial, as it starts to come across the palate. It does really start to get those soft, fruity orchard fruits that we're used to. But as it comes through the back, and as you keep on swallowing, this whiskey stays in your mouth for 30, 40, 50 seconds. It's an evolutionary sherry bomb, I would describe. All
right. Well, then let's chew on it, guys. So put some on your tongue and really don't swallow it. Like let it shift around. Give it 15 seconds. Really let it soak into the skin of your mouth. Then describe your experience. What are you reminded of? Oh yeah, it's 15 seconds. We're not there yet.
It's the best 15 seconds of your life.
This is the most riveting part of the podcast. I just broke the rule. I swallowed it. I was like, oh well, I guess I have to drink more.
I think in terms of holding whiskey and letting it develop, it's amazing the different ways that you can play about with the whiskey and to allow yourself to find it into different tastes and different flavors. Even wine casks, if they breathe for a little while, sherry, port, they also open up, and the bouquet inside it, across the palate, it totally changes.
This is magnanimous. It's really, really good. What do you guys think of this 18? Yeah, chocolate and licorice. I get like this kind of anise in there.
I think that quite often when people think about sherry cask finishes, they think about sweetness. But there's no sweetness in here, but it's still very, very fruity. It's like this dry
rich
fruit.
Yeah, dark cherry.
Yeah, dark cherry, dark chocolate cake. A little bit of that saltiness.
Damn, that is... How much is that? That's an 18-year-old single malt.
How much would you pay?
You don't want to play gotcha with me, baby. You don't want to play gotcha. I'm a bourbon drinker. I can get it for under $12 a bottle. You know what I'm saying?
So it'll retail for about $99.
Wow, that's amazing.
We like to joke that we're Macallan pricing from about 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing. 18-year-old single malt Scotch for under $100. That's hard to find in these days. I think this is really good. It's got great mouthfeel. It's got great structure. Yeah.
And it pairs with two different things for me. I mean, it pairs with, well, maybe three. And two of my favorite food groups, which are meat and dried meat.
You're a Scottish trucker.
That's 2 out of 3, is it not?
Wow.
But also works really well, sort of cigars. If you're outside sitting in a balcony,
Yeah, right. It'll
just
stand
that
up.
full body that stands up against like a nice
Yeah,
cigar.
like because cigars can be super drying to the palate. They kind of like take everything over. So you need something that's like bassy and oily and fruity.
robust and-
Yeah, it's something that'll stand up.
There's a beautiful
the dryness
oiliness
of
in
the
this whiskey
cigar.
as well.
So okay, we asked these guys to bring in some special little treats for you, and that's what Stephanie has in her hands right now.
Just one more glass, and I'll come back around. What is this we're tasting? I don't want to butcher the pronunciation.
Kubokin, that's probably the easy.
Kubokin.
Yeah, as it looks, or does it look like?
phonetic.
It's phonetic. Yeah.
What does Kubaka mean?
In Gaelic, ku means dog and bokken means ghost. So
Ghost dog. Ghost dog.
I mean,
Ooh. I'm all into this.
It's
This is rad.
it's more like mythical beast, mythical apparition.
Okay.
You know, Gaelic's an incredibly descriptive language. So
Kubakan.
yeah, Kubokin.
Kubakan. So Cubocan. But it has like
But
a
they've got,
strange
like, accents.
There's accents on there.
Inflictions, are they?
Inflections.
In 2005, we started making peated malt at Tomatin Distillery. We did it for the last 2 weeks just before Christmas. We shut down over Christmas, so it allows us to clean out everything after we make the peated malt.
And not do anything for a couple weeks.
And we released it for the first time in 2013. So that probably tells you how old this no age statement is. It was 8 years old. We use 4 different types of casks to make this whiskey. We use first fill ex-bourbon, first fill Oloroso sherry, virgin American oak, and refill. It's also been lightly peated. The phenolic content's between 12 and 15 ppm, which when it comes to Tomatin, because we've got such big, tall stills, you're never going to get that much smoky character into the whiskey. So what this does is it creates this lovely earthy texture into the whiskey, which is running through, especially in the finish. But with these 4 different casks, your palate will go in different directions. And the thing that I find the most fun for me about this whiskey is that every time I come to taste it, it's a little bit different. You know, every time, sometimes it's a little bit more citrusy, sometimes it's a little bit more bourbony, sometimes it's a little bit more sherry, sometimes it's nutty. And we talk about balance sometimes in whiskey, which can be incredibly important. But this style of whiskey is completely, completely different. And for me, I think I find it fascinating and really, really cool.
I gotta say, my man. That's all I gotta say.
That is a high compliment, my friend.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. I mean, it's a whiskey that we're incredibly proud of. It is rare because we only make it for 2 weeks a year. But a phenomenal little dram.
Really
Super small. So
Works
like,
really well.
how many bottles for the whole world?
I mean, every year, let me sort of work this out. So at the time, we'd have been doing 16 matches a week. So we'd make there's probably about 40, 50,000 bottles a year that we've been making of this.
How much gets out of Scotland?
So, when we first started making this, it was only 1 week. It was only 5 days, so it would have been even smaller back then. But we've ramped up from 5 days to 2 weeks. So, not as much gets out of Scotland as you might think, but we.
Yeah, I know.
But
I've been there. I know how much
over
you guys
here
are
is
keeping it
our
around.
biggest market, and North America is our biggest market that we export to. So it's a delight to come over here.
What do you guys think of this?
600 bottles in California.
600 bottles. Wow. And what it's going to cost me?
40, 49.
What?
Where quality with value?
Yeah, like I said, go to your mom and pop liquor store and ask them to order this right now. What are you guys getting as you tap this over the tongue? It's very different from anything else that we've tasted so far.
Grilled tomato.
I love grilled tomato.
Grilled tomato?
Yeah.
No, he means a grilled tomatin.
At least someone can speak properly in here.
This again has this nuttiness to me. Like there's like kind of the DNA of this is like throughout all the expressions is this sweet nuttiness. It's really, really nice. And what do you attribute that to? Is just the fermentation? Like you guys have like a nutty beer, or like how do you make that like? It's like these toffee notes. They're just exquisite.
I mean, I think a lot of for me, the creation of sugars happens inside the mash tun. So inside there, that's where you're going to be able to gauge how sweet your whiskey is going to be. Oh, good catch, good hands. I think sometimes people overlook at casks and they say that the casks are so incredibly important. But actually, a lot of the magic happens inside the distillation.
Absolutely, that's what I'm getting at. The DNA to me is like you can taste Tomatin in the distillate. It's like with no age, I would still identify it. I think
you totally would, and some of it's such a gorgeous spirit in itself. But a lot of it's down to the people that make it as well.
Yeah.
You know, the people that make Tomatin have got so much pride in what they do. We used to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, but now we stopped working over the weekends. But the boys that still live on site will go up and check the mash, the fermentation that's happening over the weekend.
And you're saying that like 1,500 people live in this town?
So yeah, but on site we still have 30 houses where everybody that works at the distillery gets the opportunity to live it.
Old like cobblestone style houses that are actually connected to each other.
Yeah. Exactly, but that creates a community.
Yeah.
And that creates a community that people are proud of.
Yeah.
There's a connection to the distillery. There's generations. There's fathers. There's sons. There's mothers. There's daughters. There's everybody.
It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Yeah. That's what being human is all about.
I'll tell you the bad stories after the podcast ends.
That's what being human's all about as well. Right? How big is the town now?
So there is a village that's sort of sprouted up around the distillery, which is about 1,000, 1,500 people.
Wow.
Right beside the distillery. It's in between sort of Aviemore and Inverness, which are two biggish populations.
And give us a picture. What's it like when you're there and you're staying at the distillery? What's it look like? You guys are like, you've got sea on both sides of you there.
So we've got sea on both sides, but we're up in the mountains. So the mountains in Scotland come straight up from the sea, which makes it so spectacular when you arrive.
The highest of the Highlands.
If you work out, I think we're the third or fourth highest distillery in Scotland.
Right, I think Dalwhinnie is further.
Dalwhinnie and Tomatin, I know, are both higher than us, and I think one of these new small distilleries are as well.
And barometric pressure has a intense effect on the flavor profile of the whiskey.
But I mean, even temperatures, it's so interesting. So, I mean, even there's different things that you can do, whether you want consistency or whether you want to create more, so you get a bigger yield from your malt. And so we've changed a lot of our process to get more consistency and stop playing about with temperatures so much, so in order to get more consistency. So there's a great many things that you can do which will affect the flavour, but we're trying to do as little as possible to affect the flavour now at Tomatin.
What do you guys think of this Kubacon?
Yes.
That's the whiskey talking. No, I'm kidding. No, we're there. This is amazing.
Eastern Scotland, Highland area.
Okay, so but like this is a conversation that people are having, is that northeastern Scotland wants to kind of like have their own designation of like, this is the northeastern style. You guys are up in the northeast, but this doesn't taste like what I think those guys are trying to do.
No, so I mean, the northeast distilleries, so they're like, when you're talking about Glenard, Clynelish, Dalmore, Chinnerich, they have a very different style to Tomatin. We'd never like to compare ourselves to any distilleries, but I mean, probably closer in style to the likes of Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, Dalwhinnie, the Benriachs of the world. You know, we want to be experimental. We want to be able to create a good, soft, fruity spirit. But at the same time, there is that little bit of rugged Highland charm at the backbone.
That's right. Uh-oh, what's going on around here?
So...
Okay, I don't know about you guys. Wow. Okay, yeah, we are not worthy. We are not worthy. This is insane.
So you were only going to get this if you all behaved, so, you know.
I guess we behaved all right. But tonight we're doing it, guys. This is amazing. This is amazing. We're going all in.
What is this beautiful gorgeous box that you just brought out.
Yeah, what is this? What is
So what we have here is Tomatin 36-year-old.
Now this is Lord of the Rings right here. She's so good. Yeah, she's so good.
So, in terms of whiskey tasting, what this is this complete. You've got to sort of reprogram your brains back to thinking about a different style of whiskey. This moves away from the peated malt, but I think we're probably going to enjoy this. So, if you don't have any water, please rinse out your glasses before you drink this.
Wow. Evan, you had a question.
You just answered it. I know you guys are rebranding, and with the new 18, the new bottle, one of the best whiskeys I've ever had, not just Scotch, but whiskeys, was 30-year-old. And I was just going to ask, are you bringing out any older age statements with this new rebranding? And there it is.
So the 36-year-old we have here tonight, the 30-year-old is, the new 30-year-old is on the water just now.
So about 2 weeks.
2 weeks away. So it's coming. It has been released. It's available throughout the world. 36-year-old as well. The cool thing about Tomatin is the 36-year-old is part of our core range. So it's
that's ridiculous.
1988 in market.
We have a 1988 vintage in market. Which
Okay, so again, this goes back to that idea that because in this area, if they're only getting 1 to 2% evaporation every year, then you can have these expressions. I dare you to go find me a 36-year-old bourbon. You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't, the whiskey's all gonna be gone from evaporation. But this is age in the barrel. This is like rare, and like most whiskeys will never even get to be this old because they'll be turned into what they drink up there in heaven.
So we make Tomatin 36-year-old in batches. Each batch has 3 casks. These 3 casks, two of them are ex-bourbon casks, but they're not ex-bourbon casks first fill. They're probably not ex-bourbon casks second fill. These are refill casks because what we want to do is to not have the oak overtake the flavor of the
Which is
spirit.
very traditional, actually, in Scotland and Ireland as well. That's very traditional, like a used bourbon cask, meaning it's been used several times.
Several times. And what that does is it allows us to mature for this length of time. Now, people talk about whiskey ingredients, water, barley, yeast. When we talk about ingredients as well, you've also got to talk about oak and oxygen and the people. And
That's
so
right.
it's the most important thing for this whiskey, for older whiskey, for Tomatin, is oxygen. So it's getting this air into the cask, because oak breathes.
It's true, and barrels are organic containers that breathe a lot.
They breathe a lot. Yeah. So oak is a very strange material in the fact that it allows air to come in, but the liquid will not escape.
So what's it like to be, what's the name of the town where the distillery is?
Tomatin. So,
but what's it like there? Like if you were hanging out on a Saturday night, there's like a little,
there's a little
pub. There's a little community pub. You
There's
go in
community
there.
shop. Cheers.
What's going on at that pub? Thank you, love. On like a Saturday night, I'm in Scotland. I'm in this tiny village. I
There's a little
wander into
community
the
pub.
bar. Tell me what it's like.
So for a long time, the pub actually shut down. So they've just started the pub back up as a community hub, so that people can go back in on a Friday and Saturday night and enjoy themselves. In terms of Tomatin, it's almost like a little sleepy commuterville now.
Yeah.
But when the distillery was built in the 1890s, and as it grew throughout the first 50 years, it was incredibly remote. 15 miles in Scotland used to be a long way. And in fact, the road used to snake and roll, and it wasn't the nice highway that's there now. So as that happened, it created its own little community. And that's how that sprung up. And like I said, we have people that have been working there through generations. We've got cousins, we've got whole families, mothers, fathers, sons, daughters.
Are they nice?
They're lovely people. They're lovely people. They probably wouldn't say the same about me, but
Well, that's cool. The way that they drink there, like, what is it like when you're in that bar? Like, how are the old timers, if they're drinking that Tomatin at the bar, like, how do they drink it? Because I know that here we are pretty hardcore. Americans drink hard and fast.
And they drink hard, fast, and they probably drink bigger measures. They don't. In Scotland, it's just it's a 25 ml measure, which I think is a.
So that's a half, less than half of what your shot is.
So an airplane, the little tiny bottles, is twice that what he just said.
25 milliliters is a tasting portion here in the Bar Jackalope. Tasting portion, and that's a full pour in Scotland. And often I see people they have these like glass pitchers of water at the bar in Scotland.
So I mean, one of the so you've got a boiler maker over here. So a boiler maker in Scotland is called a half and a half. So it's called that's a half and a half. So it's like a half.
A short beer.
It's a half pint and a half ounce pour. So and that's what a lot of these old timers would drink, is they'd have a half pint of bitter. Of 70 shilling, 80 shilling, which is Scottish brown beer. You guys probably wouldn't like it because it's warm, but then they have that with a wee dram on the side of it. In terms of how we drink whiskey at home, there's it's about sort of creating that sort of the relationship with your friends and your peers, and you can sit out there, and sometimes it's not about the quality of the whiskey you have, but it's about the location and the people that you're with.
Of course.
And it's about creating that atmosphere, and whether that be outside at a wedding, like, you know, we're drinking out of a hip flask.
Hell yeah, some of the best whiskey I've ever had in my life came out of a hip flask.
Golf courses, everything like that. And that's, I think for me, that's what I find so wonderful about whiskey, is the fact that it creates these relationships. Sometimes you never know where you're going to end up, but it creates a lot of fun memories.
Well said, my friend. You guys, let's give it up to Mr. Scott Fraser. Cheers, guys. Fraser. Is it amazing, right? Amazing. It's beautiful stuff, man. And really beautiful stuff. Thank you.
If I'm going to be honest, some of these flavors that come in through here are like sort of. If I'm going to be honest, it's not these tropical fruits. It's more like Hubba Bubba and Tutti Frutti, and those sort of like.
So bubble gum is a floral, actually. When you think about bubble gum, it's a floral scent.
These nostalgic childhood flavors that come through the glass, and it's so fresh and it's so. Young is the wrong word, but it gives me those memories of childhood, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, you keep discovering it. You could like sip it again and again and again and keep finding new things in the flavor profile. There's still more. Yeah, I'm with you, love. I'm with you.
It is, and it's the type of whiskey that you can just sort of hold and smell. It's thinking whiskey. You have to really take your time over it.
That's right.
Yeah.
What do you get, Nevin?
That aftertaste is just so fruity. Every part of this, I feel like with spirits, you're more getting it on your palate, but the nose, the palate, and then the aftertaste are all just absolutely fantastic.
So how do we create that flavour in Scotland? So there's three casks, 2 refill bourbon casks, so they've probably been used 2 or 3 times before, allow the cask to oxidise. So there's 1 sherry butt as well, so it's been finished in a sherry butt for 5 to 6 years. And but the sherry, because there's so much structure already in the whiskey really holds up against the sherry. And for me, I wouldn't really know that this has been in a sherry cask, the same as for even a longer time than the 18-year-old. So it shows you how time can evolve a whiskey as well as the cask. So each batch is made using 3 casks.
Okay.
2 bourbon casks, which are hogsheads, and one sherry cask as well, which is about 500 litres. So basically, each batch is about 1,000
It's kind
bottles.
of a marrying time, but like it's only 1/3 at that point.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, I get no sherry influence on this at all, and I always find it very difficult to talk about sherry when you talk about this. There is a little bit in the colour, you can tell it's a little bit darker, but it's just because the whiskey's got so much, when it evolves in the cask, it totally changes. Tomatin between the ages of 18 and 25 morphs into a different specimen.
This literally smells like
totally
you're
different.
through a tropical forest
Yeah.
in Central America.
The mouth feels very different too.
It smells like being on my grandfather's house.
Like everything
Sounds
was nutty
amazing.
until now, and now all that nuttiness is like chocolate and fruit. It's crazy. It's crazy. So you're just using a commercial grade yeast that you buy and use the same yeast all the time. It's not like there's a bunch of like tropical fruit trees growing around the distillery.
Yeah, no, but we do, funnily enough, we do have palm trees growing on the west coast of Scotland, which people find hard to believe, but nobody ever believes me when I say that.
No, some Californians moved out there in the 70s and they brought them with them.
So, no, this style of whiskey is what has totally transformed my opinion of older whiskey.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of conversation that it provokes is fantastic. And
Yeah, what are you guys getting with the 36? So this is way older than most of the whiskey you'll ever drink in your life.
36.
36, what are you getting? Guava.
You have a question over here, Stu?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm not even really sure if I know what question I'm trying to ask here, but
That's the whiskey talking.
in pursuing
Focus, guys.
an age this high, were there like any barrels that you guys eventually kind of lost trying to hang on to them to make them this old that like they went too far?
You always have, once whiskey gets past a certain age, by about 25 years, you have to be monitoring the cask very, very carefully to make sure that it doesn't drop below 40% alcohol. You also have to be monitoring that it doesn't become too oaky, because that's not the style that we want. Some distilleries want to have an oaky whiskey. So
Wait a second. So if it gets underneath 80 proof, what happens?
Then it's no longer
funky, huh?
It's no longer single malt Scotch whiskey.
But will it turn bad, or will it like start to get
No.
rancio?
It'd be a gorgeous drink, but legally you can't call it single malt Scotch whiskey if it's less than 40%.
Right. Okay, so just legalese.
There have been under 40% whiskeys that end up getting used to drop the proof of legal whiskey down to 80.
That's totally what I was kind of getting at.
Add whiskey that's under 40.
Well, I think what most master blenders are doing are actually taking over oaked barrels and blending them down to a point that's palatable. That's what the master blender's job is. It's like there's a lot of over oaked barrels out there in the world, but the master blender, the selector, every day is kind of like got this schematic in their mind, and they're like able to pull from different places consistently day after day to create consistency and a flavor profile that's acceptable. Because definitely there's over-oaked whiskey, stuff that's so tannic that you will not want to sip on it at all. It has to be blended down. That's blending whiskey for sure, but it's strong. It's got essence. It's why people blend.
It's incredible. I mean, 36 years, but it has so much complex flavor. I mean, that's mastery.
It's what makes it. I mean, it's what blows my mind about whiskey is when whiskey when it's younger, I can understand why this happens. Once it starts to become older, it's the air, it's everything, and it's like, why? Why is something that's so... It's probably the easiest whiskey for us to make, because all we have to do is leave it there.
That's the hardest whiskey to make. If you're like me, I can't wait, man. Yeah. So you guys, again, let's give it up for Scott. This is amazing. Scott Fraser. Tomatin single malt. A lot of people have never tasted it. A lot of people have never heard of it. Check it out. Buy a bottle, because this small little town needs a little love, right?
Needs a little love. And I mean, thank you guys so much for coming here. You've got no idea how much it means for us when we come to the other side of the world. This is a 12-hour flight for me to get here. You know, it's amazing that people come here and listen to us. It means a lot. I mean, for us to be able to promote something that's from our home country that's managed to evolve out across the world, it's been a lot of fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed it and keep on drinking not just whiskey but Tomatin. Cheers, guys. And thank you both for having us.
Yeah, man, that's awesome.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you heard, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give us a 5-star rating and review. The Spirit Guide Society is a Spirit Adventures production in association with Bitten from the Apple Productions. Special thanks to Tone Mesa for their post-production and audio services. The show was produced by Andrew Apple and me, Pedro Shanahan. Executive producer, Andrew Abrahamson. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Spirit Guide SOC. We'll be there to answer any questions you have, share what we're drinking, and more. And if you're still thirsty, you can always find more episodes of the show wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to always drink responsibly. That means don't drink to forget, drink to remember.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's 2 big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook @modernbarcart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, additional editing and production assistance by Andrew Apple, beautiful single malt Scotch and spirited narration courtesy of Tomatin brand rep Scott Fraser, a little bit of colorful commentary and spirit guidance from our friend Pedro Shanahan, and some top-notch audio curation by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.